This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is the 200th episode of Solve It for Kids. The podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners, for the 200th time. We have got a wonderful episode lined up, as I bet you knew we would. We always bring the science here on Solve It for Kids, and this episode is no different.
Oh, this is going to be so awesome. What problem are we solving today?
How much is there still to learn about the ocean?
How much is there still to learn about the ocean? An extremely important question. And we have the very first guest on our Solve It for Kids podcast here to answer this question. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
It is my honor to introduce our guest back on the show, Brian Helmuth. He is a marine science professor for Northeastern University and the chief scientist of the Proteus Ocean Group.
Welcome to the show, Brian.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. This is so exciting. I can't believe it's 200 episodes. Wow.
I know, right? And so for all of you listeners who maybe haven't been with us the entire journey, this was my idea way back in the pandemic. And the first person I called was Brian. And I said, Brian, I want to start a podcast. And what did he say? I'm
Absolutely.
in.
Yep.
Right? He said, I'm in. Let me know what I can do. And so here we are on our 200th episode. And we are so excited to have you back talking about the thing that we all love the most, the ocean.
Yeah.
So can you start kind of by reminding our listeners what you do and, what you're working on with the ocean?
Yeah, so many different things. So I'm an ocean explorer and marine biologist. So a lot of what I do is figuring out how plants and animals live as part of the ocean. But a lot of what I think about is how do humans live as part of the ocean, and how do we do that in a way that's different than we have before? I mean, how do we be part of the ocean than thinking of it as this big, scary, unknown place?
Yes.
Okay. Can you do us a favor and say a little bit more about that? I think some of us love the ocean and it's sort of in our minds all the time. But what does it mean for humans to be a part of the ocean?
Yeah. So, anytime we walk by or drive by the ocean, we're just seeing the surface, right? We may see waves, we may see boats in the surface. A lot of what I do is diving beneath the waves and seeing what life is like underwater. And in some ways, it really is like this alien world. I mean, you're seeing animals that don't look anything like we see on land.
Yes.
Right.
So amazing and cool. And you almost can't believe that these animals exist. But by the same token, 99.9% of the living space in this planet is in the ocean. And it's part of our world, right? I mean, we're part of it and we're impacted by it every day, whether we recognize it or not.
Yes, exactly. So one of your other titles is Aquanaut. So you spent a fair amount of time under the ocean. Yep. Can you kind of tell people what it's like to live under there?
Yeah, so we do what's called saturation diving. And what that means is you go to the bottom of the ocean with scuba gear, like we normally do with surface diving. But rather than coming back up to the surface, you come up into a space station on the seafloor that's filled with water. So you're literally living on the seafloor for extended periods of time. So I've gotten to do that a couple times before for 10 days at a time. But the really cool thing is that after a couple of days down there, you feel like you're part of the ocean. I mean, you start naming all the fish around you. You almost become hostile towards the surface. You think of it as the surface being this alien world and you being part of the ocean. And so it's just one of the most amazing experiences of my life, a couple times. And I can't wait to do it again in Proteus.
Oh, that'll be
Very cool.
fun.
That is very cool. So what I was hearing is when you're down there, all of the land dwellers are sort of like muggles.
Yes, exactly.
And I get that's why you are so passionate about sharing this.
Yeah.
You just finished that last answer with, can't wait to do it again at Proteus.
Yeah.
I mentioned you're the chief scientist for the Proteus Ocean Group.
Yep.
What is Proteus?
Yes.
Yeah. Proteus is the brainchild of explorer and aquanaut Fabian Cousteau. I worked with him on a project called Mission 31 10 years ago now, where we had a team live on the seafloor, a team that lasted for 31 days. It was in this habitat in Florida, a space station called Aquarius, that unfortunately right now is not working anymore. It got by a hurricane, but it's small and it's getting up there in years. It's 40 years old.
Right.
But Fabian got this idea, why don't we build the world's largest space station that can support people underwater, not for 10 days, not for 31 days. What if we lived there for months?
Wow.
Continuously had people living on the seafloor. I mean, what new insights and science and discovery could we do that there's just no other way we can accomplish without living on the bottom of the ocean?
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And that kind of leads into our big question, which I know is tough to answer in a 30-minute spot here. But how much is there still to learn about the ocean? I mean, we know we are sending people to space. We've had people living in space for, 20 years, but we haven't had the same thing in the ocean, have we?
No. I mean, the estimate is that we know maybe 5% of the ocean bottom.
Whoa.
I mean, it is just so unexplored. You've probably heard this before, but we really do know more about the surface of the moon than we do about large sections of the ocean. And every time I go diving, I discover something new. And I and my colleagues, my fellow marine scientists, are just constantly learning new things and surprising things that we just never knew existed before. And it really changes your view of the world.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give us one example, one that comes right to the top of your mind of how it has changed your view of the world?
So we are building Proteus in a place called Curacao. It's an island that's just to the north of Venezuela.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons we're doing it is, as you know, coral reefs have had a really tough time with climate change, especially in Florida. We had 100-degree temperatures in the waters of Florida.
Oh, wow.
Just had a really decimating effect on the corals. But in Curacao, there's still a healthy reef. So one of the really cool things that come out of the scientific community in recent years is, if your listeners know about Jacques Cousteau, and you probably talked about Jacques Cousteau.
Yes, we have.
His grandfather, he invented scuba diving. He had this famous movie called The Silent World. And it was how we dive underwater into this alien environment, and it was presented as silent. We now know it's anything but.
Yes.
There are critters down there that are constantly making noises. I mean, one of the things that I loved about living underwater is their shrimp, these snapping shrimp that live on the habitat, and they fight. They actually warn each other by making bubbles of air that the center, this is crazy. They do what's called cavitation, where they make a bubble and the center of the bubble is actually hotter than the surface of the sun. And as that bubble collapses, it makes this popping noise. And so if you go down underwater and you just listen, you hear snapping and popping all over the place. And it's these shrimp just communicating with each other.
Oh my gosh.
They're the queen, they're soldiers, they communicate. But what we found, or what my colleagues have found, is that sound really matters to the health of a reef. And there are some studies that even show that baby corals, coral larvae, can respond to the sounds of the reef. So if they hear a healthy reef, they'll preferentially swim towards it to settle. So again, something we didn't even know maybe 20 years ago that scientists are starting to uncover is there are all these amazing sounds that are constantly going on underwater.
That's incredible.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, who knew? I didn't know until a couple of years ago.
So, I mean, you've probably been hearing the sounds, but you didn't know where they were coming from or what they were doing or why they were so important.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, the snapping shrimp, and I was living underwater. I listened to it because it's nice to go to sleep to at night. But we have these they're called hydrophones. They record the sounds of the reef and we can leave them in place. And so
Right.
after we go away, they will record the sounds of fish, and they grunt at each other, they squeak at each other, they make all these just bizarre noises that our
Whoa.
ears may not even be able to pick up, but these hydrophones sense enough to do it.
Right. And then do you go through and try and figure out which animal made which noise? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we can aim it at specific animals and we can record the sounds they make. And again, that's one of the advantages of living underwater. So when we go scuba diving, can you imagine this alien spaceship coming down from above and aliens tromping through your backyard? You're probably not going to walk up and offer them cookies. You're probably going to be a little scared.
Yeah.
Fish are the same way. I mean, they're scattering, they're not sure, but when you live underwater, they become used to you.
Right.
And for example, I had one mission where we had a pod of dolphins that followed us around. I lived underwater in St. Croix. There were dolphins that would be attracted to the sound of the habitat. They would come before the dive, wiggle with their fins in the sand and look at you and then dart away and want you to follow them.
Kidding.
I did another mission where a moray eel used to come up and hide between my legs and just watch what we were doing. So I just looked down and there's this big 6-foot moray eel with the big jaws.
Oh my gosh.
They're just breathing. They look scary, but they're just breathing. But just sit there and watch the science we're doing. And they become used to you.
Oh my gosh.
Fascinating.
Yeah, you only get that when you become part of the ocean environment.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
So all my brain can think of right now is Finding Nemo and how all the animals in the ocean can talk to each other and tell stories. So I'm thinking like, hey, guys, you're never going to believe this.
Yes.
I saw this crazy alien-looking animal out there, and he was like doing science.
I know, and he kept taking pictures of me, and I don't know why.
Did I have my right side up that day, right? I was taking pictures.
So what is the mission of Proteus? Just to get more people down into the water for longer periods, or is there a more direct mission?
Yeah. So the overarching mission of Proteus is to do good in the world. It is to find
That's a nice line.
New things underwater that benefit people on land. So are there new medicines we can discover underwater?
Right. Yeah.
How do we look at how marine plants and corals take up carbon? We know that a lot of the carbon in the atmosphere gets taken up in the ocean.
Yes.
How do we develop and test new technologies? We're going to study people living in the environment. There's a lot of novel medical approaches now that use high levels of oxygen, high pressures of oxygen. So that's goal one. Goal two is we want to bring the rest of the world on this adventure with us. So if you are sitting in a landlocked state in the middle of the United States, how do we get you down there with us? Can we create virtual reality worlds that allow you to see what we see, to talk to us, to actually help guide some of the science so that we're not doing this alone? We're really capitalizing on the brain power of people across the planet, even people who may not be able to get to the ocean really easily.
Right. This is going to be incredible. And you're going to allow people who aren't scientists to go down, right? Like I'm on that list. Yes, I hope.
Oh yeah, no, that's the other really cool thing is, this is not just for scientists. We want to get storytellers.
There you go.
Children's book authors.
There you go. Podcasters.
Yes.
There you go.
And actually we're going to have a full broadcast studio in the habitat. This is one of
that's fantastic.
Fabian has made TV shows and movies before. And so
yes.
We have team members. Our creative director, Lisa Truitt, was with National Geographic for 30 years.
Wow.
So we've got lots of plans for how we're going to connect to the rest of the world to Proteus.
So I have a question. So you're talking about living underwater, but living underwater and humans requires some adjustments. Yes.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? What it's like living underwater for humans?
Yeah. So let me take an even bigger step back, because a lot of what I've been trying to think about lately is how do we as humans think like a non-human animal?
Okay.
So let's just take an even step back and think about like how we breathe. So if you take a deep breath in and a deep breath out, you're controlling the movement of air in your lungs, right? So you got these little sacs in your lungs called the alveoli, where you have gas exchange, where you take up oxygen, you get rid of carbon dioxide, and we have total control over that depending on how fast you breathe. So if you're running and you need more oxygen, you just breathe faster, right?
Yes.
So that's actually a pretty unique way of breathing. So now let's think about how you breathe like a sea anemone. So if those of you listening want to breathe like a sea anemone, I want you to take your hand, I want you to put it in your mouth, reach down into your lungs and pull your lungs out and hold them over the top of your head. Okay, everybody got that?
Oh, sure. Doing that now.
Let's just really hope that the wind blows, because if the wind's not blowing, you don't have any movement of air over them anymore, and you're going to suffocate. That's how a coral breathes. That's how a sea anemone breathes. They have to wait for water to move over their surfaces in order to exchange gas. So isn't that crazy? I mean, that's the way the vast majority of plants and animals get oxygen from the world. Okay, so back to your question. How do we as humans do that?
Right.
So obviously, we have to take our own air down with us.
Yes.
It turns out that the kind of air we breathe really matters. And that's one of the things we don't think about here. So on the surface, we're in an atmosphere that's 21% oxygen. The most of the rest of it is nitrogen. And our bodies use the oxygen. When we are underwater under pressure, all that nitrogen gets into our bodies too, but we can't use it. We can't metabolize it.
Right.
So if we don't come up soon enough, or if we come up too fast, all that nitrogen makes a bubble and it can do really bad things. It can get stuck in your joints. Is what we call the bends, right?
Yep.
So when we're saturation diving, we just let our bodies come to equilibrium. What that means is the gases, the amount of nitrogen in our body ends up being the same as what we are breathing.
Okay.
And so it's the same thing when somebody, Coca-Cola makes a can of Coke, they drive gas into that thing.
Right.
As long as the can's not open, you're good. If you shake that can or you drop a Mentos in it and you open it, really, really bad things happen. That's what would happen if we came up after we were saturation diving for too long. In fact, I did a mission once where somebody got sick and they took a blood sample and they brought it to the surface in a little closed vial, and it blew the lid off the vial because it came out.
Wow.
So all of that is to say that we have to be really careful when we're underwater. And that's a big part of the training. Anybody that goes down there is going to have to be trained to not go to the surface in an emergency, to go back into that habitat. So the way we do it is, if you imagine, like if you take a cup and you put it into a bathtub and you push it down to the bottom of the bathtub, that air inside the cup is going to shrink because it's going to come to higher pressure, right?
Yes.
But there's still air in it because the pressure in the inside from the air equals the pressure in the outside from the water.
Right.
Same thing in the underwater space station. You pump it full of air to a pressure that equals the water, so that you have what's called a moon pool. And so you literally dive into the water from the inside of the habitat where that air and that water meet at the same pressure.
You mean like in a movie? Like you've seen that in a movie?
Yes,
right?
Exactly. They call it yeah, exactly. It's like walking out your back door onto a coral reef.
Whoa.
It's the craziest thing. And the fish come and visit too.
I think that's one of the coolest parts of this.
Yeah.
All the way back to the movie The Abyss.
Yes.
Long time ago.
Yes.
I have, since I was a kid and I first saw that movie, I have wanted to just be walking around inside.
Yes.
So like inside Proteus, and just have my suit on and just fall forward into the ocean, start swimming around.
Wow.
So I am excited about this.
Yeah, just with fewer aliens. Yep.
Yeah,
exactly.
And no big monsters coming out. Yeah.
No water arms coming out. One of the things that Abyss got wrong, though, is if you're that deep under that pressure, that's where it comes down to the kind of air you breathe matters. Because it's interesting. Oxygen at really, really high levels becomes toxic. And so if you're under pressure with enough oxygen, it can hurt your nervous system. And so deeper than that, we have to replace the oxygen with helium. So if
Oh,
they
okay.
were really doing that in Abyss, their voices all would have sounded like they had breathed out of a helium balloon.
Okay.
So with Proteus, back to our main question.
Yeah.
How much
Sorry, I went off a bit of a
is there
tangent
to
there. Yeah.
learn
You're good.
about the ocean? Are there specific goals that the Proteus Ocean Group team has that you want to learn more about?
Yeah, so many. One of the important parts about Proteus is that we want to view this like the International Space Station as this collaborative space.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
we
Wonderful.
know there's so many problems we have to solve, and you can't solve those using the same thinking or just the same people that have been involved in creating the problems.
Yes.
Right.
So we are working with governments, we are working with conservation organizations, we are working with private industries and companies who want to develop their own products down there too. So a lot of what we do will be developed hand in hand with those groups. You know, we're working very closely with the government of Curacao, for example, to make sure that everything we do benefits the people of Curacao.
Right.
So obviously a big one is coral conservation. You know,
Yes.
how do we not just keep the reefs around Curacao healthy, but how do we find ways of saving and maybe even helping to recover reefs around the world? So, you know,
I
this
love
is
that.
one idea
Yeah.
called super corals that might do well in other parts of the world, but also this idea that corals are different everywhere around the world, depending on where you go. But if we understand what makes some corals healthy and some corals not, maybe we can do things like changing water flow conditions that would help corals to survive. So
Yeah.
that's one of the really big ones. Another one is figuring out what happens when you live underwater for months at a time. No one's
Yes.
done that before, right? We don't
Yes.
know. I mean, just like in outer space. And we
Yeah.
are working actually really closely with astronauts as well. We have an astronaut on our advisory team, so that there are lots of parallels to living in space. We just don't know what it does to the human body to live underwater for, say, 2 months at a time.
Yeah. And that's going to be incredible to find out and then kind of compare like what happens to your body in space
Yep.
versus the ocean, two completely different environments, but still share a lot of the same things. So there's so many things we could talk about all the different things, but I kind of want to go and ask you, you've been down there so much, and I know you talked about the moray eel and everything, but are there any other really cool things that come to your mind, animals or creatures that you've encountered or things that you've learned that kind of, you know, like your top 3 of being in the ocean to get kids excited about it?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe the top one is just this reminder of how little we know.
Yeah.
Every time we go diving, we find something new. Now, like, you know, I know on a previous podcast, we talked about the underwater forest, the sunken forest,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So for anybody that hasn't heard about this before, this is a 60,000-year-old forest, and that 60,000 years, right? A couple ice ages ago, got buried in the mud and stayed buried in essentially like a deep freeze for 60,000 years, then got uncovered. And now there are trees in place, tree stumps in place,
Yes.
Alabama, Florida that we go diving on, right? So who knew, right? So we, you know, and I won't, you know, repeat the whole podcast, and we may come back to this again later in the talk here. Every time I dive in that forest, it is something new, and it's this reminder that here was this thing that was locked away. Nobody knew it was there.
Yes.
Right?
And it was uncovered by a hurricane too. So I mean it's like all of a sudden we have all of this. But yes, we can tell our listeners. So Brian shared this story with me and actually invited me to kind of be an honorary part of his team. And so there is a book coming out. I wrote a children's book and I'm excited to say it's coming out. It's called The Lost Forest, An Unexpected Discovery Beneath the Waves. It's by Millbrook Press. It comes out in April of 2024. And it's already received some really pretty awesome reviews. It's got a Junior Library Guild selection. But it's all about the scientists, Brian and a whole team of scientists who got to dive on this underwater forest. And all of the amazing video that you have, which is available now. So all of our listeners, you can go and Google this and find out about it. But yeah, this is a really, really cool thing. There's so many, but this is a really cool thing about being in the ocean, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And so all these discoveries that are just out there waiting to be seen. The other thing that after diving for, boy, how long? I've been diving for 40 years now.
Wow.
Started when I was a teenager, is just awe at how these ocean animals live in that environment. How some ways it's similar to humans, in some ways it is so different. And one of my favorite things to do is just lay there on the bottom, like at the edge of a sand channel, and just watch.
Wow.
And, you let all the animals get used to you. But, for example, you'll see a shrimp cleaning out its burrow, and then it'll have a partner with a fish that's living in that same burrow. You see corals actually extending their tentacles out and shooting harpoons to catch their
Wow.
life. Yeah. It just that my PhD advisor used to write on the board, "Ain't nature wonderful?" ANW. Every time we discover something cool, it's just like, I can't believe this thing actually exists in real life.
Wow.
Just these strange creatures that are out there. And I guess you asked for three. I mean, I think the third one, and I've been thinking a lot about this lately, is what does it tell me about myself and as a human to be in that environment and make me think about how I live with the ocean.
Yes.
And how we might do this differently.
Very good. Very good.
Okay. And I imagine you are already getting our listeners to think that same way right now.
I hope so. Yeah.
With that lost forest. So I was lucky enough. I spent 4 years living in Okinawa, Japan, which is a coral reef.
Yeah.
Dove dozens of times. Actually, my single favorite view from planet Earth is a full moon seen through 60 feet of water.
Oh, yeah.
My absolute favorite thing I've ever seen, besides my daughter's face. But that's unfair. That doesn't count. It's got to be sciencey. The underwater forest.
Yeah.
Are these trees like we are thinking about on land? And if so, because it just got uncovered and you've dove down to this, have animals, fishes, and all that stuff, has marine life moved into this new environment?
Yeah, so that's largely why we're studying it. So first part of your question, they're not like trees on land, and that these aren't 50, 100-foot tall trees that are underwater, right? These are mostly stumps. And so the tops have worn away. So what happened was probably 60,000 years ago is this giant mudslide that buried the trees, and whatever was exposed got washed away. And so, maybe you've got stumps. But when we go diving, one of our favorite places to dive is along an old riverbed where you can still see the edge of the riverbed with the roots sticking out. So this is called the cypress forest.
Yes.
So if any of your listeners live in the Southeast US, you still see cypress forests that have big roots that stick out.
Yes.
So we will be diving along what is obviously a riverbed, and you can reach in the bank and pull out a piece of wood that you swear you could still put in a fire. It still has sap in it. It still has the color in it.
Very cool.
It looks perfectly preserved. And so there are lots of animals in the ocean that like to live in and eat wood. So they break down wood. They have bacteria that help them with that. But normally there's just not a lot out there. Maybe a piece of driftwood will settle. Now imagine you got a 9-mile-long smorgasbord of wood that just got uncovered.
Yeah.
You bet those animals are moving in. So, we work with a group called Ocean Genome Legacy that's led by my colleague Dan Distel.
Yes.
They study what are called shipworms, which actually not worms, they're clams. They burrow into it, and their gills and guts have bacteria living in them that break down the cellulose from the wood. So a lot of what we're looking at is what animals live on this smorgasbord that just got uncovered.
Yeah.
That's very cool.
It's a really, really amazing story. And there's so much cool science and cool scientists. Like, just talking to the whole team, everybody was like, oh my gosh, You wouldn't think people would be that excited about shipworms, but they were, right? Like, I mean, they're cool.
I know. They're really cool. I mean, I don't study shipworms other than this project, but Dan got me excited about them. They're
Yeah,
really cool critters.
exactly. Okay. So where would, if a kid or a teenager or whoever, anybody listening, if they want to get into what you do and learn more about the ocean, can you give them some recommendations of where to start?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big believer in starting with your strengths, right? So I grew up in upstate New York, nowhere near the ocean, but I spent my afternoons just crawling around out in nature, in the woods, in the streams, in the ponds. I learned to dive in a lake. And so I think wherever you live, just get out and explore where you live, because even if you're nowhere near the ocean, those skills of observation, just paying attention to what's around you, even if you live in the middle of a city, there's still a lot of nature around you.
Right.
You can go to a local park, you can go to a local stream. There's a lot to learn that ultimately will really help you as a marine biologist. I think read as much as you can. I mean, I read and watched Jacques Cousteau movies that really got me excited about that. There are lots and lots of really good documentaries and children's books that are out there that will get you up to speed. But, the other thing is, if you're an artist, play to that strength. Start drawing pictures of the ocean. If you are driven by math and engineering, think about how you would build an underwater habitat and maybe even try to make a model of that.
Wow.
If you're a storyteller, write stories about this. There are just so many different strengths that are needed and skill sets to solve all these problems that we need all hands on deck, so to speak, at this point.
Yes, absolutely.
I love that. I love how you asked each listener to take their strength and what they do, because we have talked to so many different scientists and engineers, and every single person to a person has talked about the other scientists that they need to work with to complete any sort of a mission. So this is going to be fascinating to watch. I want to go back to Proteus. I can't wait to learn more about this lost forest. I want to go back to Proteus. What does Proteus mean?
Proteus is the bearer of wisdom and is the son of the sea god, right? So again, Fabian came up with this name. And so it is from Greek mythology and seemed like an apt name for an underwater space station.
It sounds great.
I agree. Okay. So unfortunately, we've come to the end of this episode.
Oh, man.
We could have Brian talk forever, and we'll probably have to have you on for our, 300th episode, Brian.
There we go.
But we are at the time in our show where we ask our guests to give our listeners a challenge. So what is your challenge, Brian?
So we are still actively building Proteus. I mean, we are already doing the science. We're getting ready for it, but we're still looking for help and input and ideas and creative solutions to some of these problems. So here's my challenge. I would like your listeners to think about, if you wanted to live underwater for 2 months at a time, what would you want to live in and what would it include? Would you want a movie studio? Would you want to be able to communicate back in the classrooms? How would you design a habitat that made you feel like you were living on the seafloor? So the way we've done this in the past was to almost lock ourselves away, almost like a submarine.
Right.
You're almost trying to recreate what it's like to live on the surface, but live underwater. What I would challenge everybody listening to do is think about, what if you actually wanted to become part of the ocean? And like you said, we have to breathe air. We can't breathe water.
Right.
At least not yet. But there are all these ideas of liquid breathing that are being looked at. But how would you design a habitat? So draw that up, make notes, and if it's okay, send it in a Solve It website, and we'll take a look at it. I'd love to see your ideas, your creative ideas for how would you live underwater, and maybe we'll even use some of those ideas as we finalize the designs.
Love that.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
Before Jennifer ends us, I have to ask, because you are one of the experts in this world, can you tell all of our listeners and us one of the things you would include in an underwater space station?
Yes, I would include lots and lots of windows.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So one of the times I lived underwater, the dining table is next to a window and we had an octopus lay her eggs.
Yes.
And she moved water over the eggs so that they got oxygen. It was just the most amazing thing for you to be in the aquarium. I want lots and lots of windows because I want to look out at the reef constantly.
Yes.
I don't want to be separate from it.
I thought you were also going to say lots of peanut M&Ms because isn't that what you guys like to eat when you're underwater?
Yes. So we want really good food. Yeah, that's one of the bad things about Aquarius is the food was awful. Yeah, I want really good French food.
There you go. There you go. That sounds great. Oh my gosh, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for being on our 200th episode of Solve for Kids, Brian.
This is so much fun.
Very special to talk to Brian for our 200th episode, but special to talk to him at any time. He is such an expert in his field, and his field covers more than 70% of our planet.
It sure does.
What a fun episode. And there is still, as we just learned, so much to still learn about our oceans.
Oh, absolutely. And there's so much to discover and there's so much to be curious about going into the ocean to learn all these different things and so many things we don't even still know about this. It's so incredible to me. And that's why I love this challenge and what Fabien Cousteau is doing with Proteus. You can go and take a look at that. But how would you create a habitat, right? Like what are some things that you would absolutely have to have in your habitat, Jeff?
I totally think this is what gets our imaginations going. I think a lot of people skip by this with things like, oh, you know, super kitchen, or I want the big screen TV and all my video games. I want very comfortable bedding.
I want good food and I want big windows so I can look outside. So the question is, what do you want, listeners? We would love to hear from you. Tag us on our social media. We're at KidsSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And don't forget to check out our website, solveitforkids.com, where we'll have a whole bunch of information about Proteus and Brian and all of the amazing thing he does, as well as some cool books for you to check out. And thank you again for listening for all of these episodes, because we wouldn't be here at our 200th one without all of our amazing listeners.
100% true. For our 200th episode, we absolutely would not be able to keep interviewing these amazing guests and learning all about the science all over this planet. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on Solve It for Kids.